So I'd like to thank the Templeton Foundation for making tonight's celebration possible, and especially thank Professor Plantinga. I'm very honored to add my voice to this chorus, both literal and figurative, of people celebrating the gift that you are to philosophy. I personally admired your work throughout my career, and at different phases in my journey as a philosopher, different of Plantinga's virtues have spoken to me in different ways. So as an undergraduate philosophy major at the University of Virginia, what I most admired was the rigor of your arguments. So metaphysicians in the first part of the 20th century had tied themselves up in intellectual knots trying to make sense of possibility and necessity. With the de re, de dicto distinction and armed with the apparatus of possible worlds theory, Professor Plantinga cut through these contradictions. He was held up as an example for undergraduate philosophers of how philosophy can make progress, how we can go from a state of being confused about a question to becoming clear about it and being able to ask it in new ways. When I was in graduate school, I was struggling to find my own writing voice, and I came to deeply admire the style, authenticity, and humor with which you executed your arguments. At Oxford, we were examined on modal logic, and this required us to read every word of The Nature of Necessity, and I'm not going to lie, returning to read your work after weeks down in the logic mines, reading other philosophers that were working on these topics, I was always excited to be reminded of the joy and the way that even very abstract topics can be made personal if they're in the hands of an extremely talented philosopher. As a newly minted PhD, I was deeply worried about the ways in which my Catholic faith might be a liability in an extremely tight and secular academic job market. I was advised by some teachers and other students to try to hide my faith or downplay it as much as possible so that I might have greater opportunities. What I most admired at that point in my life was your courage. In many academic circles throughout your career, belief in God was treated more as a historical feature of philosophy, not as what William James might call a live question for many philosophers. But from the beginning, you've let your faith be visible in your philosophical research, and that took tremendous courage over the decades. Your example helped many other men and women of faith see that they had futures in this field. And I see many of these philosophers in the audience here tonight. So over the years, your example has made me and many others more careful, more eloquent, and more intellectually honest. At this phase in my journey as a philosopher, another one of your virtues speaks even more loudly than these three. What I most admire now is the virtue of wonder that thoroughly penetrates your work. This summer, in preparation for this event, I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole rereading your work, especially the material on Reformed epistemology. And I came to think about how central this virtue of wonder is to excellent philosophy. Indeed, it is a particularly fitting virtue, I think, for a Christian philosopher. A favorite Old Testament passage of mine is Psalm 8. In Psalm 8, King David pauses from listing some of his favorite features of God to marvel at how surprising it is that we can even think such thoughts. He says, "When I consider your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars which you have set in place, what is mankind that you are mindful of them? Human beings, that you care for them." David, in one of his rare and reflective moments, acknowledges his smallness while also giving thanks that he nevertheless has this extraordinary ability to think about God. Professor Plantinga, your work in epistemology and metaphysics and religion emboldened many philosophers to wonder about God again. And this attitude of wonder itself has three interesting philosophical features. First, it suggests an optimism on the part of the wonderer. There might be answers out there that we might be able to grasp, even with our admittedly limited abilities. Second, it suggests a high value on those answers, whatever they might be. And most of all, wonder entails a surprise and love of the question itself, of its ability to even be pondered by us, and of the excitement of entertaining those possible answers. How amazing to think like David that we might have minds capable of entertaining such truths, that we might have minds that are formed in God's image. In your work, Professor Plantinga, you give us a life-giving example of how our minds can rigorously and fruitfully seek such knowledge. This prize is also an occasion, I think, for us to think more seriously about how we might carry over Professor Plantinga's work and inspiration especially in the current landscape of professional philosophy. And here I have two thoughts. First, I think it's quite natural for scholars to feel a twinge of embarrassment when they become interested in questions like whether God exists, whether our decisions are genuinely free, why evil occurs, or whether any of the complex moral, historical, metaphysical, or theological claims of a particular faith tradition might be true. There's a pressure to back away from such questions, to need to justify even raising them in the academy in the first place. Perhaps this is because these questions are difficult to make progress on, or perhaps it's because we worry that thinking deeply about such issues might destabilize us, might threaten the core assumptions that we need to navigate our daily lives. Plantinga argues throughout his corpus of work that wonderers about God do not need to face any special epistemic burden to justify themselves or their interest. These questions are meaningful. They can be reasoned through in better or worse ways, responsibly or irresponsibly. We have occasion for great optimism. In the process of this reasoning, we might just find ourselves inadvertently developing a better modal logic, developing a new theory of what constitutes evidence. Our wondering minds can be unified, and we should resist pressures to quarantine or dismiss questions of faith. Faith and reason are not two opposed monoliths, as they're sometimes set up in the field. Faith feeds our reason with questions to entertain, and reason gives us the most satisfying way to entertain them. So the first Plantingan lesson I think that we must carry forth is to not let ourselves be fooled into accepting some superficial dichotomy between faith and reason, at the risk of starving both. Here's the second thought. In his widely circulated and often mentioned tonight, 1984 Advice to Christian Philosophers essay, Professor Plantinga urged the philosophical community to be more openly courageous in representing their deepest commitments in their choice of research topics. In the year 2017, we still need courage, though I think the landscape is far more open to this kind of work, largely because of Professor Plantinga's efforts. I would argue that alongside the virtues of wonder and courage, another virtue is now even more important for Christians who would try to enter this field. And that's the virtue of love. Love of the truth, love of the questions themselves, but most importantly, a love for our fellow questioners. One thing that is remarkable about Plantinga is the vast number of graduate students that he trained, the undergraduates that he inspired to enter philosophy, and the colleagues who felt empowered by his example. It is easy and too common, I think, to measure the success of an academic by the number of articles that he's published or the frequency with which he's cited. But how much better to measure the impact by the number of other minds that he has brought into the common search. In Plantinga's writing and teaching, so many others have found a blueprint for asking their own questions about possibility, about freedom, about God and faith, and about the capacity for our minds to know. His influence cuts across faiths. It cuts across generations in philosophy. It is truly a form of love, Christian love, to show other people that they have this capacity and to invite them into the debate. We can all, I think, do much more in our own writing and teaching to enliven these questions for others. And we should especially seek out those who are struggling now to find a foothold in philosophy. Academic philosophy grew much larger and more intellectually diverse by Professor Plantinga's example, but our field could still be more expansive and more ambitious. Most importantly, we were designed to wonder not alone, but together. So tonight we celebrate the love, courage, and wonder that bring out the very best in philosophy. And we celebrate the philosopher who reminds us of our highest callings. Congratulations, Professor Plantinga.